Invite those that you do not expect anything in return, verse 13. When you give a reception, invite the poor. Invite the crippled. Invite the lame. Invite the blind. And you will be blessed, since they do not have the means to repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. In our class on the major prophets downstairs on Sunday morning, one of the things that we've noticed that God has criticized in Israel and in other nations around Israel at that time is the fact that they did in fact overlook those who were in need. Predominantly the widows and the poor. But typically those who are lame are among those who are poor. In fact, you go somewhere outside the United States and the lame are going to be the poor. Because they don't have the means to provide for themselves, and who else cares for them? Who else looks after them? Who else gives to them? And so Jesus gives this parable in verse 16. Jesus said to the man, a man was given a big dinner, and he invited many, and at the dinner hour he sent his slave to say to those who had been invited, come, for everything is ready now. But they all alike began to make excuses. Excuses to come to this dinner of this wealthy man. How many of us would turn down a dinner, an all-expense-paid dinner, to eat with the governor or to eat with the President of the United States? To sit in that formal atmosphere and to enjoy the cooking of some of the best chefs in the country. But these people had this invitation and they began to make excuses. And the first one said, I bought a piece of land and I need to go out and look at it. The land's not going anywhere. What an excuse. Please consider me excused. Another one said, I bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm going to try them out. Please consider me excused. Can they not be tested tomorrow? He devalued the invitation. Another one says, I married a wife and for that reason I cannot come. The slave came back and reported this to his master. Then the head of the household became angry and said to his slave, go out at once into the streets and lanes of the city and bring in here who? The poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. The dregs of society, the vast unwashed, unkempt people, the ones who don't take care of themselves, the ones who are scrawny because they don't have enough food to eat, the ones who are unwashed because they don't have any water to bathe in, the people that nobody else wants to have anything to do with, you want to invite those to your great dinner? Yes. Because the love of God is what motivates. And the love of God sees the image of God in other people and realizes that every human being is important in the eyes of God. And everybody, especially those that don't have the attention and the love of other people, are the ones who need the attention and the love of Christians. And so he invites all of these people to his dinner. And the slave says, Master, what you've commanded has been done, and still there is room. And so the master said, go out to the highways and along the hedges and compel them to come in, so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste of my dinner. They had the money. They had the money to buy the property. They had the money to buy the oxen. They were well established in society. They were married. They had children and families. But because they spurned the invitation, they missed out on the banquet. And so the large crowds were going along with him, and he turned and said to them, deny yourself and follow me. The apostles in the first century, the other Christians in the first century, in the book of Acts, also showed the love of Christians on those who were disabled. In Acts chapter 3, Peter and John healed a man who was lame from his mother's womb. The text says that he had been lame for 40 years. For 40 years, he was crippled. In Acts chapter 8, the paralyzed and the lame were healed by Philip in the village of Samaria. In Acts chapter 9, Aeneas had been bedridden for 8 years with paralysis when the Apostle Peter healed him. And in Acts chapter 14, the Apostle Paul healed a man who had also been lame from his mother's womb in the village of Lystra. Christians have always shown the love of Christ to those who are disabled. And so finally this morning I want to make some suggestions that come from, in fact, a special ed teacher who wrote an article in a religious magazine a few months ago on what Christians can do individually and as a congregation to serve families with children with disabilities. She said, and she had been a special ed teacher for years, she said not hardly any of her students went to church anywhere. Can you imagine that? A whole subculture within our own culture that doesn't go to church anywhere. And it's because probably Christians haven't thought specifically about them and thought, how can we serve them and show the love of Christ to them? First of all, Kim Higginbotham is the woman's name, and she said, practice the golden rule. Welcome these families. Be friendly, obviously, and patient and understanding with the child and the parents. Affirm to them how much them and they and their children are welcomed and loved and respected. Second of all, do what we can to learn about the child's disability. You are perhaps like me and you're kind of afraid to ask. Maybe it's embarrassing. But maybe it's not. Maybe they're glad to let you know just what the problem is. And sometimes it can help us to know how to respond to the child. If they have some mental disability or if they don't. Just because they're physically disabled doesn't mean they're mentally disabled. My friend from college, we would go to, there's a Taco Bell across the street. We often stop on Sunday nights on the way home from church and we'd get some burritos or whatever to take with us back in the dorms and eat. And frequently, he would let the person at the cashier, the cash register, know that he was blind, and guess what they would do? What would you like? He would say, I'm blind, I'm not deaf. That's what the problem is. Kindly, gently, but it might help you know how to respond. Understand that the child may exhibit unusual and distracting behaviors. They may not be able to control their behaviors. They might be somewhat disruptive in worship. Oh, how they need to be tolerant. Don't whisper. Don't gossip. Don't stare. Don't point fingers. And don't assume that their disruptive behavior is the result of bad parenting. I don't know what it would be like to try to discipline a child with mental disabilities. How strongly do you discipline them? How gently do you discipline them? It's not always easy having children that don't have disabilities. To wonder, how do you discipline them properly? Pray for the families. They need our encouragement and they need our help. Include children at social events. Children with disabilities obviously need friends. They need peers their age who will accept them and will be their friends. The little boy in the wheelchair in the 6th grade, he didn't have a lot of friends because he couldn't run and play with them. It takes someone who will sit down and say, okay, I'll do with you something that you can do. Provide services for the families like babysitting or meals, gift certificates to restaurants that have takeout. Because you can imagine such families don't get out a whole lot. Provide transportation, maybe for other children in the family, to doctor's appointments or so forth. And certainly love the child and include them as much as possible. Be empathetic. Listen. See the children as being made in God's image and not look at disability or diagnosis. Certainly treat the children the way you would want your children to be treated. Our congregation has an atmosphere of love and acceptance, and that needs to be shown to those with disabilities as well. Well, Ms. Higginbotham, Sister Higginbotham also offers some other suggestions. For us as a congregation, provide a Bible class suitable for children with learning disabilities. If we get them to come to worship, invite them. And if we have them come, then we may need to have someone else sit in the class to help with the one with a disability. We may even need to provide one-on-one Bible class instruction for such a child. Again, we could provide something for the siblings, for the families, a parent's night out in order for them to have some time away. We need to look for ways to include such people with disabilities in the life of the church. And there are things that we do here where they can help serve as greeters, for example, or taking care of the facilities here at church, or sending cards, helping in the food pantry. There are things that they can do and ways that they can serve to be a part of the church. We have facilities, I think, that are accessible for those with physical disabilities. Maybe there's other things that we can do. We need to brainstorm ways to advertise and to include people from that community in our advertising and let them know about the church, because everyone needs salvation. And then, of course, as we've done this morning, we need to examine the life of Jesus and observe just how Jesus healed the sick and made the blind to see and the mute to talk and the deaf to hear. Jesus loves those with disabilities. Disabilities are an affliction of the devil. The devil has come along, God has allowed him to come along and test people's faith and to test our ability to love. Disabilities are from the devil. God allows it to challenge us.